We are following developing news. A magnitude 4.4 earthquake shook the Bay Area overnight.
A bit earlier there that a 4.5 earthquake actually shook the Bay Area.
We're following breaking news. A magnitude 4.4 earthquake shaking the Bay Area overnight.
I felt it in Oakland. It jolted me out of bed. It felt like a big rig was going underneath my home.
And in fact, it was right centered in the area of Berkeley. We're getting this video in on Twitter this morning, a local Safeway in the area, and one of the store clerks there showing that some items fell on the ground.
Joining us now on the phone is David Schwartz, a geologist from the USGS who also lives in Danville. Good morning, David. Tell us what the concern is now for perhaps aftershocks.
Well, any earthquake of this magnitude generally produces, some small aftershocks. The real question is this a foreshock to something larger? That's the concern. This earthquake magnitude, there's been a couple of magnitudes given, 4.4 and 4.7, so it's right in that mid-4 range. And it is centered on about a 5-mile-long section of the Hayward Fault that in the past 10 years has produced 30 earthquakes of magnitude between 3 and 4. So it's a hot spot along the fault. And today's earthquake, this morning's earthquake, was the largest of that group.
And David, we want to ask you, this is obviously a really good time for people in the Bay Area, especially the ones, I think every day we just think about, okay, could the big one be coming? And anytime we feel an earthquake like this, we think about that. So this is a good time to remind all of us to be prepared. What can we do to be prepared?
There's personal preparedness at all levels, certainly home and family. And there's a lot of information available now on how you should prepare your house and your family for just about any type of emergency. Your car should be prepared. You should have preparation plans where you work. You should have what's really important is a family communication plan. Your kids are at school or they're at work. Your spouse is working. How do you get in touch with them? What happens when the cell phones don't work or the landlines are down? So these are things to think about, and I think an earthquake like today's is just a reminder that we do have bigger earthquakes in our future.
David, from all accounts, from people we've spoken to this morning, no reports of any injuries, no reports of significant damage. Tell us what we would see or what you would expect to see if this earthquake were a 5.0 with the same epicenter right around Berkeley and Claremont Hotel. What would we see?
When you start to get up into a 5, low 5s, then you begin to get very minor structural damage. You'll have things thrown from walls. Shelves will open and dishes can fly out. And the larger the magnitude, the longer the duration of shaking, and then more and more damage happens. And a 5, that whatever damage does occur is pretty local. When you start to get up to a 6, it's more widespread. And then a 7, which is the kind of earthquake we expect, affects the entire region. And that affects the infrastructure. So that's where we're at.
You talked about the Hayward Fault, and in the last 10 years, about 30 earthquakes, 3.5 magnitude or a little bit higher. There is this perception out there that with these smaller earthquakes that releases some of that pressure, so maybe the big one won't hit. Is that a misperception?
Yeah, this is a great urban myth. Everybody asks that. Really, what these smaller earthquakes are saying is that the level of stress on the fault is high, and as a result of that high stress, patches on the fault are slipping, are failing. So it's just an indication that the seismicity and the stress level is high. It doesn't release the stress and thereby push back the big one. If we had a magnitude 6.5, that might push something back for a 7.5. But these 3s and 4s are just an indication that the fault's active and the stress level is high and that something larger can happen.
So, David, this earthquake that struck at 2:39 this morning at the epicenter right near Claremont Hotel in Berkeley, it was along the Hayward Fault. So, tell us tell us a little bit about the San Andreas Fault, some of the other fault lines in California that we have to be concerned about. Where are we seeing the most activity in terms of the faults and minor earthquakes?
Well, for the Bay Area, we're sort of basically the center of active fault activity in California. We have the San Gregorio Fault out by Half Moon Bay, which is a branch off of the San Andreas Fault. We have the huge San Andreas Fault that produced a magnitude 7.9 in 1906. We have the Hayward, we have the Calaveras. The Hayward becomes the Rogers Creek Fault to the north, and it joins the Calaveras Fault to the south. We also have, coming out to where I live in Danville, we have the Greenville Fault passing by Livermore, and we have a big fault under Mount Diablo that's pushing Mount Diablo up. And in Concord, we have the Concord Fault, which becomes the Green Valley Fault. So we're sort of ground zero for faults. And all of these faults are active, and over the past few hundred years, they've all produced large earthquakes. Since 1906, the Bay Area has been very, very quiet seismically. 1906 was really so large that it released all of the stress throughout the crust in the Bay Area, and that's been rebuilding. And we're going to reach a point in time where these faults have enough stress on them that they can fail in large earthquakes. And exactly when that is, we don't know. But we've suggested, we've done some studies, that by the year 2043, between now and then, we have a 72% chance that one of these big faults will produce a 6.7 or larger earthquake. And we can't be any more precise at this point in time, but we know we've had earthquakes in the past, we can see it in the geologic record, and we know we're going to have them on these faults in the future. The question is exactly when, and we don't know exactly.
Yeah, and
Scary thought.
Yeah.
Everybody has a story of how this woke them up in the middle of the night, of course, hitting at about 20 to 3 in the morning. I woke straight up in my bed in San Francisco, certainly feeling it, as people did as far south as South San Jose and Saratoga. We've heard from people. I just spoke with a man who's actually a nurse at a nearby Kaiser Hospital here in Oakland. Here's his story.
I was working in the ICU, and it felt like a giant punched the building, and all the nurses came together to talk and woke the patients up. Everybody's blood pressure went up, so it was quite a bit scary for a lot of us that haven't felt an earthquake in a long time, because usually you're moving around or you're doing something. You know, being in California, you like to think you're used to it, but when it hits, it's still scary.
And that man was born and raised here in the Bay Area and said, as you heard, that it was pretty scary. He said they do have protocol there at the hospital. Normally, they would, if it was a very serious quake, all go to a protected area. But this one lasted about 5 seconds, and by the time it was finished, everybody knew that everybody was going to be okay at that point. Everything felt stable. But he said those are also the times when you question the structural stability of the building you're in. Again, I'll repeat, no reports of any damage or injuries here, even near the epicenter on the Oakland-Berkeley border. I'm Ann Makovic, back to you guys.
All right, Ann, thank you so much for that report. Joining us now on the phone, we have Keith Knudsen. He's the Deputy Director of the USGS. Thanks for joining us here this morning, Keith.
Oh, you're welcome. Good morning.
So, Keith, tell us, I was actually looking at last couple of weeks. There was actually 3 earthquakes, all above 3.0 magnitude, striking Northern California around December 27th. Tell us, should we be concerned about these minor earthquakes and, of course, today, this 4.4?
Well, today's earthquake was obviously a little more energetic than those other ones. I think the ones you're referring to were pretty removed or distant from the one that happened this morning. So there's probably not much a relationship there. I think all of this is just a reminder we live in earthquake country.